The number of hate crimes in the U.S. went up enormously as soon as Donald Trump started running for president. And I think you've seen the same thing here in Europe. Unfortunately, we have leaders that stimulate fear, and that fear causes us to do really terrible.
I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans.
Between now and November 5th, Trump is the most hated man in America by mainstream media. On November 6th, number one on that list is going to be Musk. Number two is going to be JD Vance. Number three is going to be Trump. Because who is the only person, if you pull out a chart and you put a timeline, you'll have Trump is 4 years. Musk is 53, 54 right now. How long do you think Musk's going to live? 30, 40 years? So Musk is like this. That's why he's deep.
When Richard Gere, yes, the smooth-talking silver fox from Pretty Woman, decides he's had enough of JD Vance and Trump's nonsense, you know things are about to get entertaining. Gere didn't just speak up, he torched them like a Broadway marquee. Imagine JD trying to clap back while Trump's off in the corner Googling, who is Richard Gere? Spoiler, he finds out the hard way. Buckle up, because Hollywood just dragged Ohio straight into the spotlight.
And I'm in shock. My wife is in shock. We're all in shock. You know, the people spoke and they elected this president, and that's a fact. But I don't even think the people who elected him really believed that he was going to do what he said he was going to do. And what he's doing is much worse than what he even said. The dark profundity of what he's been doing in the last week is mind-boggling. That he would be shutting down PEPFAR, which has been doing extraordinary work, especially on...
Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you don't want to miss this. So picture this. You're going about your day, minding your own business, and then, bam! Richard Gere decides to call out JD Vance and Donald Trump. Yep, that's exactly what went down. And it's one of those moments that makes you stop and wonder, did the universe just align in a way that actually makes sense? The man who made Pretty Woman a classic and has been America's heartthrob for decades is now roasting JD Vance and the Trump administration. If you're not hooked on this story yet, I don't know what could reel you in, because this is the kind of roast that could make even the toughest politician feel like they're sweating it out in a sauna with no towel.
Saved tens of millions of lives. This is dark time in the U.S., and I think it's a time for everyone to stand up. You know, I was reading an article by someone, a Hungarian, who watched things change so radically under Orban. And he said, America better be vigilant, because we didn't know how fast this would happen in Hungary. And I can see this happening very quickly now. We have this incredibly dark marriage of power and money like we've never seen before.
Let's dive into the paradox that is JD Vance. He's the textbook example of someone trying so hard to be seen as a man of the people, yet he's as far removed from them as possible. It's like he's wearing a "I'm just like you" t-shirt while lounging in a chauffeur-driven car, sipping on artisanal coffee. Vance has mastered the art of rhetoric. He knows exactly what words to say to stir up the crowd, but the reality is, he's playing a game that only he believes he's winning. His entire political persona is built on this illusion that he understands the struggles of the working class, even though his life story reads more like that of a privileged rich kid than a true representative of the people.
Are you a racist? Do you hate Mexicans? The media calls us racist for wanting to build Trump's wall. They censor us, but it doesn't change the truth. Joe Biden's open border is killing Ohioans, with more illegal drugs and more Democrat voters pouring into this country. Now, I've heard about the joke. I haven't actually seen the joke that you mentioned, but I think that it's telling that Kamala Harris's closing message is essentially that all of Donald Trump's voters are Nazis, and you should get really pissed off about a comedian telling a joke. That is not the message of a winning campaign. And most importantly, it's not the message of a person who's fit to be the president of the United States.
Vance's most famous moment comes from his book, Hillbilly Elegy, where he paints himself as some kind of working class hero who miraculously rose above the struggles he claims to understand. Sure, he talks about growing up in a dysfunctional family, but what he conveniently leaves out is that Vance had the privilege of escaping those challenges by attending Yale, something the very people he claims to represent didn't have the luxury of doing. He wasn't exactly sleeping on the streets or fighting to survive. Instead, he was getting an Ivy League education while presenting himself as the authentic voice of people who had no way out. If that's not the epitome of being out of touch, I don't know what is.
Okay.
And I just had one question for you.
Can I finish my remarks first?
Yeah, I just want to know if I could get a refund. I didn't like the book very much.
All right. There we go.
$16.99.
You're gonna go now.
$21 in Canada. It just wasn't that good. I didn't find the main character wasn't very likable.
The audacity of JD Vance to now present himself as a champion of the forgotten masses is almost laughable. He entered politics and immediately started pandering to the same people he once exploited to climb out of his self-created narrative. He went from criticizing the elite for being out of touch with reality to becoming a card-carrying member of that very elite himself. Now he's out there spouting populist rhetoric about how he's going to fix things for the people he pretends to represent. But here's the spoiler. He's just another member of the elite using the working class hero trope to manipulate voters into giving him more power. The only thing JD Vance knows about hard times is how to package it neatly for his next fundraising event.
My biggest problem with Trump, and there are many, many things to pick out, but my biggest problem with Trump is that his message to the right, especially the white working class of which I came from, is anti-conservative and in some ways anti-American. It's fundamentally that the deck is so stacked against you that unless I'm the president, nothing that you do will change your life's outcomes. I think it's wrong, and I think it's very...
And that's JD Vance in a nutshell. A guy who spent years pretending to be a working class hero, only to sell out to the very people who've been exploiting that class for decades. What's worse, he's still trying to play the outsider card, while being deeply embedded in the swamp he claims to despise. Meanwhile, Trump, who's built his entire empire on the idea that he's the only one who can fix things, has done absolutely nothing except deepen the divisions. He doesn't have solutions. He's got bluster. That's probably why Vance can't resist hitching his wagon to Trump. He knows that with Trump's approval, he can ride the coattails of that populist energy all the way to Congress. But Gere is calling him out, showing that this isn't leadership, it's a con, and Vance is playing right into it.
Yes or no, because your running mate, JD Vance, has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with JD, in all fairness.
Senator Vance, just to clarify once and for all, if Donald Trump were to be elected, if a federal abortion ban were to land on his desk, would he veto it?
Well, Kristen, as you saw the president say, we hadn't discussed it. We still haven't discussed it, by the way, because it's not realistic, Kristen. I think that was the point that he made during the debate, is he's been incredibly clear that he doesn't support.
And then there's the media circus that Trump thrives in. Richard Gere isn't just criticizing Trump for his disastrous policies, he's calling out the entire spectacle of it. Trump has turned the most powerful office in the world into a reality show. He doesn't understand diplomacy, he understands headlines. He doesn't care about the details of policy, he cares about the drama. And that's exactly what JD Vance is hitching his wagon to. He's playing the same game Trump has mastered. Make everything big, make everything loud, and hope people don't notice there's nothing substantial beneath the surface. But Gere isn't fooled, and he's making sure the public isn't either. It's one thing to have someone in power who says the right things, but Trump? He's become a screen legend in his own mind, and it stings. Vance, who should know better, is aligning himself with someone who's only been about the spectacle, not the substance. Gere, on the other hand, shows real courage in calling out both Trump and Vance, pointing out that they're more interested in the drama than in real change. Meanwhile, figures like Starmer are out there trying to please everyone, and Trump's is dividing everyone. But Gere, he's calling out both sides for what they are, opportunists who couldn't care less about the people they claim to represent. The irony in Vance's situation is undeniable. He wrote a book about the forgotten working class, and now he's cozied up to Trump, the man who did nothing but offer them empty promises. JD Vance, despite all his talk about understanding the struggles of the working class, has become just another politician chasing after the Trump pie. And Gere, the guy known for being the handsome, morally upstanding hero on screen, has decided enough is enough. He's out here calling out Vance and Trump for what they really are: opportunists, who are more interested in power than the people they claim to represent.
The worst of it was a week ago when he decided to completely dismantle and destroy USAID, which is the wing of the U.S. government that was started around the time of Ronald Reagan, I believe.
Let's talk about JD Vance's grandstanding, because when he's not busy trying to pass himself off as a man of the people, he's busy attacking the very people he claims to represent. He loves to sling mud at liberal elites while sipping overpriced cocktails in Washington, D.C., all the while pretending to care about the struggling middle class. But when the cameras are off and the money's rolling in, Vance is just like any other political opportunist. He's quick to speak out for those who feel forgotten, but when it comes to actually doing something about it, silence. Vance is the perfect example of someone who talks a big game, then hops into a fancy car and drives off into the sunset, leaving the people he claims to represent behind. In reality, his so-called working class appeal is nothing more than a marketing gimmick, and sadly, some people are falling for it. But when the smoke clears and the fake populist act fades away, all you're left with is JD Vance, just another elite pretending to be something he's not.
Tragedy that we're all experiencing in the U.S. I mean, the worst of it was a week ago when he decided to completely dismantle and destroy USAID.
And then there's Richard Gere, the man who can pull off a tuxedo better than anyone and make you believe in true love with just a glance. Gere's been around long enough to spot a political charlatan from a mile away, so when he calls out JD Vance, he's not holding back. He's coming at Vance with the kind of intensity that only comes from someone who's seen enough political theater to last a lifetime. Let's be clear, when Gere speaks, he's not just a pretty face. He's got a moral compass that JD Vance can only dream of. Meanwhile, you've got Trump, the man who could bankrupt a hotel and somehow convince everyone he wasn't at fault, a walking controversy for years. Yet somehow, JD Vance thought it was a good idea to cozy up to him. Vance, the same guy who used to lecture us about how we need to stop being so divided, now goes full throttle Trumper, probably because it's the quickest way to power, right? Forget about principles, forget about consistency, just hitch your wagon to the loudest voice in the room and watch the followers clap for whatever he says.
Of being the benefactor of people who are hungry, who are starving, of people who are running away from violence, people who are lost and need a home. We're pandemics, everything. This is the environment, what's happening to the world. So this is a president and administration who's pulling back from all of those human responsibilities.
Richard Gere, however, isn't playing along with that game. He's been around long enough to see through people like Vance, and he's not letting them off the hook. Gere is calling out the entire circus, including Trump and his toxic legacy. What's powerful about Gere's critique is that it's not just about personalities. It's about the real harm Trump's brand of politics has done to the country. Gere sees Trump's influence over the right as nothing more than a political parasite, feeding off the insecurities and fears of Americans, especially those left behind by both parties. He's speaking for the majority of people who are fed up with the endless charades, the fake populism, and the empty promises. We're living in a time where people are exhausted by flashy slogans and bait and switch politics. Gere is calling out JD Vance and Trump as two sides of the same coin, politicians more focused on fame and power than actually solving any problems. The beauty of Gere's criticism is that it's not just a sharp jab, it's a wake-up call to the American people who've had enough of performative politicians pretending to be on their side while building empires on their ignorance.
Donald Trump just woke up a screen legend and it stings. He really ought to know better than to upset an American. Like his choices on screen, Richard Gere the man also shows more than his fair share of courage. His heated criticism of Donald Trump is no exception. Stay tuned.
And that's JD Vance in a nutshell, a guy who spent years pretending to be a working class hero, only to sell out to the very people who've been exploiting that class for decades. What's worse, he's still trying to play the outsider card, while being deeply embedded in the swamp he claims to despise. Meanwhile, Trump, who's built his entire empire on the idea that he's the only one who can fix things, has done absolutely nothing except deepen the divisions. He doesn't have solutions. He's got bluster. That's probably why Vance can't resist hitching his wagon to Trump. He knows that with Trump's approval, he can ride the coattails of that populist energy all the way to Congress. But Gere is calling him out, showing that this isn't leadership, it's a con, and Vance is playing right into it.
What was wrong about Donald Trump?
In 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear?
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong.